In the last video, we talked about how the true meaning of investing is not to chase an ever larger number, but to keep ourselves from being slowly alienated by the giant machine of capitalism into nothing more than tools that keep functioning. It is about taking back control of our own lives. And FIRE, in many ways, is one of the most mainstream and realistic ways ordinary people today try to resist that alienation and push back against this kind of life-draining structure. But the problem is that many people still understand FIRE only at a very superficial level. They think FIRE just means saving aggressively, building up a large amount of money, and then retiring early and never working again. That is actually a very shallow understanding, and you could even say it is a misunderstanding. So in today's video, I want to take you through a completely different way of looking at FIRE, what it really is, what truly makes it attractive, and how we should choose the financial freedom path that actually fits our own lives. A lot of people misunderstand FIRE because they treat money as the ultimate answer, as if once you have enough wealth, all of life's problems will somehow solve themselves. And that reminds me of Jim Carrey's very famous quote, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of, so they can see that it's not the answer." Wealth is, of course, very important, especially when someone's income and assets are still at a relatively low level. In that stage, more wealth really can improve your circumstances and raise your happiness in a very noticeable way. But the problem is that this relationship is not linear forever. The classic 2010 study by Kahneman and Deaton found that when income is still relatively low, as income rises, both life evaluation and happiness improve significantly. But once annual income reaches roughly $75,000, the boost to happiness from additional income starts to slow down quite clearly. Later studies, along with a 2023 synthesis of the evidence, further showed that for most people, happiness usually does continue to rise as income grows, but the gains become increasingly limited. And that is exactly why FIRE should never be understood as an endpoint. If we look at it more carefully, FIRE has never really been just about retiring early. In academic research, the most common definition of FIRE is usually not save enough money and stop working, but rather achieving financial independence as early as possible through high savings, controlled spending, and consistent investing, while gaining the option of retiring early. The real emphasis has always been on financial independence. Early retirement is more like one possible outcome, not the only objective. In other words, what truly matters in FIRE is not that you never work again. It is that you first gain the ability to stop being forced to sell your time to a system you may not even believe in, simply in order to survive. And that is exactly why FIRE attracts so many people. A lot of people assume that those who pursue FIRE are just lazy, that they do not want to work, that they simply want to opt out of life. But that is not at all. In Taylor's 2021 research on FIRE, he pointed out that FIRE critiques mainstream consumerism on one hand, emphasizing restraint, saving, and reclaiming one's time, while on the other hand, still relying on investment returns, capital income, and financial markets. So FIRE is not simply an escape from capitalism. It is more like using the financial system itself to carve out a space of freedom for yourself. Put differently, what makes FIRE attractive is not that everyone suddenly wants to do nothing. It is that more and more people are becoming dissatisfied with a life structure in which they work for the sake of work and live only to keep the system running. And if we go one layer deeper, what FIRE really touches is an even more fundamental question. Should work be the center of life, or should it simply be one way of supporting life? Related research also finds that people's motivation for pursuing FIRE is usually not just a love of money. It tends to point much more directly toward things like control over time, freedom to choose one's lifestyle, and the possibility of escaping financial pressure and career pressure. Khan and Pandey, in their 2023 digital ethnography of FIRE communities, also found that what drives many people is not simply, "I want to make more money," but a desire for freedom, control, happiness, and an escape from high-pressure paid labor. In other words, what makes FIRE truly interesting is not the word retirement. It is that FIRE pushes people to rethink a much bigger question. What kind of life do I actually want to live? And there is no single answer to that question. Once you actually reach FIRE, do you want to create, spend more time with family, travel, switch to a lower-paying job you truly love, or live a simpler and quieter life? FIRE cannot answer those questions for you. In recent ethical research, this point has actually been strongly emphasized. In their 2025 paper, The Ethics of FIRE, Heilman and Simonoska argued that FIRE has an important deliberative value. In other words, one of its greatest meanings is that it forces people to seriously think about what kind of life they truly want, why they work, how much money is actually enough, and whether many of their desires are truly their own desires at all. So if we understand FIRE from this angle, you start to realize that it is not just an early retirement plan. It is more like a mirror. It allows you to see again whether you have been turning means into ends, whether you have been working for money while forgetting that money was supposed to serve life in the first place. It also helps you realize that the true meaning of financial independence may never have been about exiting everything, but about finally having the chance to seriously decide how you want to live. The mainstream discussion usually divides FIRE into 4 paths: LeanFIRE, FatFIRE, CoastFIRE, and BaristaFIRE. In the past, many people understood these paths simply as different numerical strategies, basically just different savings targets and different retirement timelines. But if you rethink FIRE through everything we have talked about so far, you realize that choosing a FIRE path is not really choosing a retirement formula. It is choosing a way of life, a direction for your life. And once you start looking at FIRE at that level, you really begin to feel its deliberative value. Let's start with LeanFIRE. Its core idea is simple. Lower your cost of living as much as possible so you can reach financial independence faster with a smaller spending target. If someone else needs $100,000 a year to live, but you only need $50,000, then naturally it is much easier for you to accumulate the assets needed to support that lifestyle. From a numerical perspective, it is indeed the easiest form of FIRE to achieve, and it is also the one that most closely matches many people's first impression of early retirement. But the problem is that it actually applies to a very narrow group of people. Because LeanFIRE assumes that you genuinely have low material desires, and that the meaning you seek in life does not depend much on material conditions. You do not need a large house, you do not need a high-consumption lifestyle, and you do not care that much about those external markers of quality of life. If that truly is who you are, then LeanFIRE can absolutely be attractive. But if you have higher expectations for your quality of life, or if the things you want to do require a certain amount of resources, then LeanFIRE is probably not for you. If you choose it only because it seems easier to achieve, you may eventually realize that it was never the life you actually wanted. So it is not that LeanFIRE is bad. It is just that the number of people it truly suits is probably much smaller than many imagine. Then there is FatFIRE, which is almost the opposite of LeanFIRE. Instead of trying to reach enough as quickly as possible, it aims to maintain a relatively high-quality lifestyle or even one above the normal middle-class standard after achieving financial independence. And of course that path has its appeal because it means a larger margin of safety and more freedom of choice later on. But the problem is also very real. The bar is simply too high. If you want to maintain higher spending, you need to accumulate a much larger asset base. And for most ordinary people, that target can easily get pushed further and further out. In the end, although you are technically pursuing early retirement, by the time you actually reach FIRE, you may already be close to normal retirement age. So in my view, FatFIRE is really only suitable for people who already have substantial capital or very high incomes. For the vast majority of ordinary people, it is just not a very realistic path. Then we have CoastFIRE. The core idea here is that you build up a meaningful amount of capital while you are still relatively young, and then let that money compound over the long run. That way, later on, you may not need to keep saving aggressively for retirement. You only need a job that covers your current living expenses. The advantage of this path is that it really can reduce a lot of people's anxiety about the future. It also makes people feel as though they have already secured the second half of their lives in advance. But once we rethink the core value of FIRE, you begin to see a fairly obvious issue with CoastFIRE. It does not truly give you back control over your life, because you still have to keep working. You still need labor income to cover your current living expenses. In other words, it may solve the future, but it does not really change the structure of your life right now. So in my view, CoastFIRE is closer to a kind of pseudo-FIRE. And finally, BaristaFIRE. This is the path that I think comes closest to the original spirit of FIRE, and probably the one that suits most ordinary people best. The core of BaristaFIRE is not that you stop working completely. It is that you have already built up enough assets to cover a meaningful part of your living costs, and then you choose a job you are actually willing to do, enjoy doing, and find far less stressful in order to cover the rest. It is not about not working. It is about no longer being forced to do work you do not want to do purely for money. That point is absolutely crucial, because as we have been saying all along, the true heart of FIRE is not retirement. It is whether, after achieving a degree of financial independence, you can actually choose the kind of life you want to live. And from that perspective, BaristaFIRE fits that definition best. You have enough financial breathing room that survival no longer fully controls you, but you still preserve the possibility of working, creating, expressing yourself, and staying engaged with the world. You can become an illustrator, a writer, a video creator, a traveler, or do whatever you truly love. And those things may not even be completely unprofitable. They may generate some income on their own. That state is actually much closer to a healthy form of freedom. Not lying flat, not completely withdrawing, but finally no longer living for money, and instead working for things you personally believe are worth doing. So in the end, the most important meaning of FIRE has never really been about retiring as early as possible. It is about forcing you to rethink what kind of life is actually the life you want. It is not a game that ends once you save up some number, and it is not a life answer that can be solved by saying, one day, I just won't work anymore. It is much more like an opportunity to re-examine yourself. The real question you need to ask is this: if I truly had enough freedom, what would I want to do with it? Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And I think that is exactly where FIRE is most valuable. It doesn't just help you escape your current situation, it gives you a chance to restart your life. It is not an ending. It is a new beginning. So if one day you truly had that kind of freedom, what kind of life would you most want to live? Leave your answer in the comments, and let's talk about it together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.